So again, thanks everybody for coming to the session today. For those of you that some of you I probably saw in Detroit at the InfoCon 2023 conference this week in Detroit. So for those of you that I saw, I had a great time. It was a wonderful event. Arma did a great job in bringing everybody together. Quite interesting that probably half the sessions in the InfoCon 2023 were either about or related to artificial intelligence. So it's a pretty hot topic right now across the board with Arma people. I think it's going to be even more so going forward. Wanted to just take a step back for a second. We decided to do this series of 4 sessions actually because everybody was not quite understanding some of the things in AI, and everybody's talking about it, but nobody had been talking about it, relating it to our space, our records and information management space. And so I think everybody needed some kind of more information to help them with their organizations. The 4-part series, the first one, and my apologies, it was really quick. The information came out really quick, and there was a holiday about that time too. So if you didn't get a chance to see that very first one, it's recorded, and Troy's dropped a link to that into the chat window. Some of my friends have told me that they went back and had a look at the presentation. They really enjoyed it. So if you get a chance, it's kind of a beginning session on what is AI and how does it work. And Troy's and my partner Daryl did a fabulous job, I think, of speaking to that whole idea of what is AI and how does it work. Really a base on the pyramid for a lot of us, and I thoroughly enjoyed it myself. So get a chance, go back and have a look at it. This second session, I actually recorded. I was going to be away, and that wasn't the main reason. As many of you know, and many of you on this call are friends of mine, and I can ramble sometimes when I get going on a particular topic. So I thought it was best in this case to do a pretty concise thing, record it, and then it would be done, and we can talk about anything that you want to talk about after that recording. We struggled a little bit with should we actually show our software tools in relation to AI, and in the end I didn't know any other way to actually relate the presentation out to AI for records and information management. So I will be talking about our software tools in relation to this whole journey we've taken to add in artificial intelligence into our software. And Troy, of course, introduce Troy again to those of you that don't know Troy. Probably all of you do. He's been on these sessions from the very beginning. My partner Troy is the Director of Development, Software Development at WesternIM, and he knows about the AI integration about as deeply as anybody that I know going forward. So we'll be able to talk to Troy or have him explain things that we need to after my recorded session. So thanks again for coming on today, and I'll let Troy run the recording, and then we'll put your questions in along the way in the chat, and as soon as the recording's done, we'll disseminate all of those questions you have and talk about them in more detail.
Okay, sounds good. Here, I'll share my screen.
I should say, for those of you that are new to the Learn With Us, how the Learn With Us sessions came about in the first place was during COVID. We recognized that our records and information management community across Canada didn't have as many training opportunities as they had before COVID. And so we kind of took it upon ourselves to put together a series of educational sessions over the last 3 years. And we'll continue to run things out. This one happens to be a 4-part series in a month, so it's a little different than usual. We usually only do one of these a month, but I think it's really important to kind of string out the AI discussion a little bit farther. Thanks, Troy.
All right, sounds good here. I'll share my screen and we'll come back after the recording here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Stirling from WesternIM. And this afternoon, I want to do a presentation for you about the journey we took at WesternIM for AI integration with our software tools. We thought long and hard about using this kind of relationship with our own tools and AI for this series of AI presentations. And it made sense in the end that we had access to our own tools so we could talk more effectively about that AI integration in using that. I won't be doing a demo today or anything like that. I will, however, be talking about our software tools and the way we did things in the AI integration. So thank you very much for being involved today, coming to our session. So the first thing I want to talk about is really the typical user challenges, and I'm starting here on the user side of the house, not on the records management side, by talking about what users go through. So for the last 2 decades, well, lots longer than that, but I'm just basically talking about the last 2 decades here. Users have typically, they don't want to participate in our records and information management vision, and I think all of you will kind of agree with me. You don't have a lot of people, jumping up and down, waving their hands, going, "Let me take part in records management in our organization." So that's kind of a given. And many end users are still comfortable working with old and comfortable shared drive folder structures. And even though they've implemented Microsoft SharePoint and Teams and all kinds of other new and interesting electronic systems. So I have to agree that even I still use a shared drive in our organization, although we have SharePoint and Teams and Documentum and a whole lot of other solutions internally. And I think that's kind of typical of, if I talk to people across the country, they are still using shared drives. So end users mainly want to use Outlook for their collaboration tool of choice. Well, that's kind of a given as well. We have Teams, and I do use Teams, of course, like many other people in your organizations, but I still use Outlook, and I'm very comfortable with that. Old pair of shoes, comfortable pair of shoes. Content bloat, lack of useful metadata makes it harder and harder for users to find the meaningful things they need to find. So there's just more and more content all the time. It makes it more difficult to try and find that useful content that everybody's looking for. And of course, now the users are faced with this multiple corporate repository situation. So they, in a lot of cases, they're not even sure where to put things anymore. In the days when all we had was a shared drive, it was pretty typical. We had to put it in the shared drive. But now we've got SharePoint sites and Teams sites and shared drives and other repositories. And users, I think, are a little confused sometimes as to where they should be putting things. And of course, we're still faced with that age-old lack of user training. And if I asked all of you how many times you'd been trained in the last 10 or 15 years, you'd say very few. And I think that's true across the board. So the facts are users need to put things away quickly in a structure that works for them in support of their jobs. So we realized years ago that users weren't going to be records management people along with us. They wanted to put things in places that made sense to them, like, for instance, invoices in a vendor folder, or they wanted to put project information into a project structure. And we actually wanted them to put things in a records management structure, but that wasn't going to work. So that never quite happened in the way we thought it might. So first thing, before I go in and talk about that user side a little bit more, I just want to kind of knock off the elephant in the room, which is anything to do with AI integration. We see all kinds of news things coming out about, oh, this or that, or is it safe to put things in? Is it safe not to put things in? Will they steal our information? All that other stuff. The parent company to ChatGPT, which I'm sure many of you have tried and used on occasion to create some content, is OpenAI. And that, of course, is the same company that Microsoft is using in kind of bed with now to come out with their Copilot AI integration with all their Office applications in Windows 11. Some of you may already have that Windows 11 application. I know it should be out right away. If you don't have it now, you will right away. Anyway, The big deal with them was they wanted to say in their privacy statement on their website, API data privacy. API stands for Application Programmer Interface. So at OpenAI, protecting user data is fundamental to our mission. We do not train our models on inputs and outputs through our API. Now, when I'm talking about models, that's the large language models. And for those of you that didn't see Daryl's presentation last week, I know it was very quickly put out in the field. If you haven't seen it, go back and have a look at it. It's worth going back and having a look at it if you haven't seen it already. It kind of talks about the way AI works and what large language models are all about, that kind of thing, that kind of base on the pyramid for talking about AI in the first place. So we decided early on, I say early, we were working with the AI during its earliest stages, like version 3, version 3.5, version 4, which is the current version. And we never tried to do any integration with anything except through the application programmer interface. So from our standpoint, it was like, okay, if we do this, if we're going to integrate AI, we want to make sure that nothing gets in a bad place. So what OpenAI is saying basically is if it goes into the OpenAI, into the API, or comes out of the API, nothing's saved, nothing's retained, nothing's trained, used to train their models. And further to that, the CEO of OpenAI, which is Sam Altman, lower part of the screen there, you'll see Sam Altman, interesting fellow and not real old fellow either, doesn't even own shares in OpenAI. But he came out and said in Twitter, same thing. Never trains on anything ever submitted to the API or use that data to improve our models in any way. So safe kind of thing to let it read a document as part of a process. Okay. Now I'll go back to the user side again. So we had a user tool, an Outlook connector tool that we've had for almost 20 years. Very specific. It was for a Documentum EDRMS large content management system. Allowed users to drag and drop email attachments, documents into Documentum. And many of you may not have heard of Documentum, now owned by OpenText, but it's a very large EDRMS environment. Clients like Boeing and Food and Drug Administration in the US, big mining companies, Rio Tinto, that kind of thing. Those size of clients, banks in the US, had tens of thousands of users using Documentum. So pretty large system, very specific. And our Outlook connector is still in production. People are still using it today. So we needed to create a new version of that. And we actually did that. So we created the replacement, but we added all the other repositories, the newer ones on there now, like SharePoint and Team sites and shared drives and others, Documentum, of course, and others, so that our users could deal with all the repository types at the same time. Well, users could drag and drop the email attachments and documents into those locations. They can even drag them between repositories in the newer version as well. But that's enough of that. It also has search, but this is really talking about the AI integration. We started there with AI integration, and we added the first integration we started. This is a picture of email pointer. This is it here on the right hand edge of an Outlook screen. All the different repositories that a person might have that are available to them based on their user credentials in the organization. But we started building AI integration into, well, email pointer, that's the name of the application. And we started by allowing people to kind of let the AI write their response to an email. And then after we got into that for a while, we went, well, that's probably not worthwhile because Microsoft's probably going to have something like that available in Outlook, the new Outlook anyway. So we kind of canceled that thought process. And we went back to, okay, what if a user wants to just drag and drop, doesn't know where to put things, and just wants to drag and drop it and put it somewhere into a structure? So that was kind of our first thought. And that's how we integrated AI initially with the email pointer application. So here's email pointer with the AI integration, what we would call autofile for the users. And here's a structure. You can see there in this structure that the user has what we call a pointer profile to a particular series of numbers. In this case, we used a typical kind of structure like a LGMA. It's the BC classification structure. And so drag and drop something on there. It says filing to, and it selects a place to put it. Now, my testing and my kind of indication when I was testing the AI in the email pointer application was, unless you work with the users and help them to create structures that make sense for their kind of pointer profiles, AI is not magic. It just goes, well, I'm not sure where to put this, so I'm going to create a folder called email for March 2022, and that's where I'm going to put it. So, I mean, there was really no magic in autumn, oh my God, what a wonderful AI this is. Unless you actually created those structures properly, worked with the users and created the structures properly. If they were messy structures, the AI had no idea really where to put things. So it would create a folder and just drop it in there. So unless the user knew, back to the users knowing where to put things, I have a vendor folder, I'm going to put my invoices in there, or I have a project folder and I'm going to put my email and supporting documentation, things like that, into the project folder. If they know where to put them, then they can do the same thing they've always done. They put it away, drag and drop it in the right places. But if not, AI wasn't going to help a lot in a messy kind of structure. So that's just, okay, AI sounds great, but you need some kind of formal structure to let it work properly in any given system. So I'm going to leave email pointer now and that user side of things, and talk about the other side, which is more important to all of us, is that records and information management side. So the next AI frontier for email pointer, though, we haven't got quite there yet, but the next frontier will be metadata. And I'm sure near and dear to a lot of people's hearts these days. Most organizations are trying to deal with metadata issues. They would like to use their data for corporate purposes, and it's so all over the place that it's hard for them to do that. So that metadata side will be, I think, the next important kind of place to work in the email side. So talking about typical RIM, records and information management challenges over the last 2 decades. So we had a difficulty trying to get senior management to buy into the whole process. And a lot of times that was because of the length of time we were talking about to get things done. So for instance, if you had a shared drive that had, several terabytes of information in it, how long was it going to take to clean up that shared drive to actually get rid of the information that was rot, redundant, obsolete, and trivial information, which could be as much as half of the information in there. So it was like, how long does it take to do that? Well, we had a tool ourselves, and we allowed that kind of thing to be able to happen, but it still took a lot of time. So it's all that cost and complexity of trying to get those jobs done. Many of those jobs, not just that one, but many of those jobs. Quick movement to 365 and SharePoint by IT, and I recognize why they did it. I mean, everybody had to move fast when COVID happened because we had no way to work remotely. So everybody rolled out SharePoint and team sites and things like that, and with not as much planning as everybody would like to have done to get that under control. So users don't want RIM style functional classification structures. That's a given, I guess. They want to put things where they want to put them. Exponential growth of content. I don't think any of you will disagree with me that that's what's happening, right? And there's no disposition taking place in many, many organizations right now. It goes in, but it never gets disposed of based on any kind of retention schedule. New types and quantities of corporate repositories being added. So I don't know how many SharePoint sites or team sites all of you have, but many people I talk to have not just hundreds, but sometimes thousands of SharePoint and team sites in their organization. And there's a lot of corporate content in there that isn't necessarily dealt with or looked after in a proper way or classified properly inside those repositories. And of course, we still have paper, right? I'm not really talking about paper today, but that's one of those things that we still have to deal with. And many of the new repository types like SharePoint don't really deal with paper. So we still have to do that. Many times RIM is not our only job. Smaller organizations, you're probably working off the corner of your desk in a lot of cases doing records and information management. And it makes it really difficult to even get any of that stuff done. And of course, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of reasons why that might not be the case. Now, we being WesternIM, we had a tool called, early on, it was called Whisper, WISPIR, but we changed the brand, rebranded it to Agile AM several years ago now. And we built it originally for large-scale physical inventory projects in 2016. Large scale, what is large scale? 100,000 boxes plus of paper to classify across an entire province. So it was a big job. And we needed to build some tools to help us with that particular project. So that's how it got its start. And then we added a lot of other things in, like dedupe for shared drives, and we added integration with the new repositories, SharePoint and OneDrive and 365, all that stuff. Passive classification. So what I mean by that is we decided that users were going to put things where the users were going to put them anyway. So once they did that, we wanted to be able to pick up the metadata from those particular documents that were in the repository, whichever repository that was. And we'd like to see them, records management wise, we'd like to see them in the structures they were in, the users had put them in, not move them around because we don't want to confuse the users too much. And then let the records management people drag and drop them into a classification structure, which didn't move the documents, it just actually added that classification. So what I would say about that is, what we would say is it's managing in place the content in the organization. So that's our kind of stance with this tool, is managing things in place. So as a comprehensive reporting system, and we used it for migration and import and data mapping and all kinds of things. I mean, it's a really versatile kind of tool, but not here to talk about the tool today, other than in relation to the AI side of things and how we got to that. Except everything was fine, and we were kind of playing around with AI integration with the Agile AM tool in its early stages. And one of our customers came to us and said, you know what, Agile AM is great, it works fine, but it's taken too long. I need to do something to speed up the ability to get this done. In their case, it was a shared drive cleanup kind of environment, and it was taking quite a while to do the job. So we said, so what do you mean by that? And they told us, and we said, okay, I guess we'll have to rethink this. We're already thinking about the AI integration, so we'll rethink how this system works. And how the original system worked was there was a sync button up in the top corner that when your records management person would hit the sync button, and it would bring in any metadata. We never touched the documents, just the metadata would bring it in, so we knew what new documents had been put into a particular repository, or in our case, electronic profile location in a repository. And so that was good. But it was something the records management people had to do separately. So what we said was, okay, well, let's fix some of these other things along the way as well. So this is what Agile AM looks like, just as a point of reference. Left-hand side here, left-hand pane is the how it looks now in a current repository. The middle is usually the classification structure you're using in your organization, whatever structure you want to put that into, and you basically drag and drop things passively into the structure, and it would keep track of that and use a classification retention information. But it didn't move the documents unless you actually wanted them moved. Up here in the third pane over here on the right-hand side, that's where the metadata was. In this case, it's like extension of the document, name of the document, author, if that was a metadata field that was there, creation date, last modified date, that kind of thing, size of the document, that kind of thing. So that's what's over there. So what we did was we changed the way that worked. So instead of the records management people having to push the button, we added a place that was like a switch you could turn on that said, okay, you got this repository, this electronic profile pointing at this place in a repository. If something lands in there, go pick it up and do something with it. So in this case, if they were using email pointer as a user, they would drag and drop it into the place they think it ought to go, and AgileIM would monitor that repository and go, oh, there's a document. I'll go pick that up and do something with it. And that's kind of where the magic of AI takes over at that point, in my mind, is, okay, auto classification. Now, I got to tell you that I've been doing this stuff for well over 25 years now. And I never thought I would really see the day when auto classification would really work. And I got to tell you, it actually does work. And I'm amazed. I'm still amazed. So here we go. Here's the kind of AI integration piece. So how does auto classification work? Now, in our case, related to the software tool, the AgileIM tool, is it looks at the file name. Of course, it looks at the classification structure. It looks at the scope notes. It looks at the AgileIM rules engine. Now, I'll tell you what a rules engine, in our case, what a rules engine is. For instance, if IT said, look, we got these documents out in the repository that have an extension of .xxx or whatever, and they're non-related files, just IT kind of things. Don't worry about them. We could set up a thing in the rules engine that said, if you find a .xxx kind of file, just ignore it. If you said anything that has the word contract in it is a contract, so classify it that way, we would say we could set the rules engine up to do that, where if it says contract, we automatically classify it as a contract, that kind of thing. And we've always had that in the tool. It worked pretty well for those kind of specific situations. And then, of course, we want to read the document itself. Remember that it's API driven, so nothing going in, nothing coming out is retained for learning in the AI, in OpenAI's GPT. So read the document, email, attachment, whatever it happens to be that had been dragged and dropped into those repositories. Because remember, a classification on an attachment to an email could be totally different, of course, than a classification on an email itself with the attachment in it. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to deal with here. So here's the classification editor in the AgileIM tool. I put this up here because you can see kind of all the metadata that we usually look at. How long do we keep it? What do we do with it in the end? What is it called? What's the classification name? OPR, many things that might be there. The big thing I wanted to call out, though, is the scope notes. So here's the scope notes in that classification editor. And this is a very important piece. I want to say this is probably one of the most important pieces that we can call out, is how good are your scope notes? Because that's what's going to help the API, along with the file name and the classification title and the reading the document and all those other things it's going to do. That's the thing that's going to help it put a classification to the document. Here's the rules engine, just quickly. I'm not going to spend any time on this at all, but that's what a rules engine looks like. So, and the auto classification works, or it doesn't work. Remember, this is all about the good and the bad in AI classification. So we went, okay, sometimes it didn't work. The classification didn't work because it was short on the scope notes, maybe. It couldn't quite figure things out. Now, what do we do to help with that situation? So we added this piece into the system, which comes up with a classification note. That's what we call it anyway. And what the AI is telling us in that classification note is, hey, I couldn't figure out what the classification was on this document. But if I was going to put it somewhere, I would put it in a classification called financial planning, in this case, financial monitoring in this case. And so it comes up with a classification that it would have put it in if it had the choice of making that choice of a classification that you didn't have. So sense here is that, and this has been our experience on with the AI integration so far. First pass, it'll do a pretty good job of picking up what it can in the classification of all the documents. But if we are short on scope notes and things like that, and our next session, we're going to do a bit of a discussion about that kind of thing in our next session in a panel discussion kind of way. And we've invited Ken Oldenberger, who's a good friend of ours, who many of you know, to sit in with us. And this is kind of going to be a discussion that goes into topics like, what does an AI-friendly classification look like? That kind of thing. So I think it's important to also talk about those other components that we currently have now. So in this case, you can either get two choices. If it didn't get the classification for a document or document types right, you can go, okay, well, you didn't classify that. So I'm going to either add a classification. I'm going to add that financial monitoring classification because we should probably have that, or add some information to the scope notes in the particular classifications you currently have that will pick up that document better down the road. So for instance, you could say add to the scope notes in some case, also include financial monitoring documents, and it will pick that up as well. So as you go, you can kind of fine tune the repositories that you're working with on your classification system. And in the end, should be pretty much comprehensive classification for a lot of the documents. Now, and nothing's going to ever be totally perfect, I don't think, but at least it'll be down to maybe tens, 20s, hundreds of documents of the hundreds of thousands that are in the repository if you're fine-tune everything along the way. So I think that's the kind of call out for me, is making sure that you give the AI as much help as you can to make the AI work properly in these kind of situations. Again, I'm only talking about RIM things here. We're not talking about all things that AI might work on, but this is RIM things. We also, just as a point of reference, we also have, once the AI has gone through and classified the documents, you can run the reports off and send them out to somebody in the organization that has to sign them off and say, yeah, that all looks good for disposition. And then we actually added the ability for the AgileAM tool to actually go and do the disposition once those things were signed off and approved for disposition by the organization. You can actually go out and have the AgileAM go and do that. So in our case, it was more of making sure that we didn't just have the AI for auto classification. We also had a way for users to put things away on the front end in the places they needed to put them away. And then we could pick those up, documents up, and classify them properly in a records and information management like way, and follow right through to the end disposition of the documents in a full cycle. So, okay, that's kind of where we're at. Now some kind of specifics about AI integration. So there is a cost, right? OpenAI isn't doing this for out of the goodness of their hearts. Microsoft has put in $11 billion into that company and totally got them going. But they use a thing called tokens for what they charge. And I'm not going to go in deeply into the whole thought about tokens, but there's a charge of 0.004 cents. Depends on the version you use of their GPT. Is it 3.5, or 4? Going up appropriately. 3 is very inexpensive. 4 is more expensive, obviously, by a factor of maybe 10. A big takeaway here, though, is, and I'll say this once, I'll just read it off the screen here. Our current benchmarks are estimated at $3,000 per 100,000 documents in a tuned environment that the AI is run against. And I really mean that. Like, if you don't tune the environment, in other words, if the scope notes aren't good and things don't get picked up properly because the classification system wasn't clean on the way in, that kind of thing, that cost will go up absolutely dramatically. Again, no magic in AI. The more information you give it, the better it's going to perform, and the less it's going to cost to actually run those documents through. But think about that, 100,000 documents. I mean, it wouldn't be possible to even deal with 100,000 documents in an environment without it, some kind of tool. I mean, we never could do that. Records and information management people are some of the cleverest group of people I've ever seen in my life. But it's all about having enough people and horsepower to actually do these kinds of jobs. If you have a repository with a few terabytes of information in it, you could have 300,000 or 400,000 documents in it. And there's no way to deal with that unless you have some kind of automated tool to be able to help you deal with it in the end. So it's a case of, well, we don't do it at all, or we find some way to automate the process to try and get the job done. And current benchmark right now for us is about 4,000 documents per hour. So think about that. I can actually classify or attempt to classify, depending how good your repository is tuned. I can try to classify almost 100,000 documents in a 24-hour day. Wow. I mean, we're talking about jobs that would take in the past, well, they never would have done because nobody would have been able to pay for them. Couldn't have enough people or horsepower to get the job done. But we're talking about jobs that would take months, even years to try and deal with. And we're doing that in like, what, a couple of weeks at the most? Holy smokes. AI is going to be the answer to a lot of things that we've always had a problem with in records and information management. So in conclusion, organizations will have to use AI integration. It's the only way that implementation is going to actually occur with the size and volume of information we currently have today. And I say rarely been possible. It's almost never been possible in most cases to get anything like that done. That's things like auto classification. Never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. Sure drive cleanup, big amount of content. Takes a lot of time and horsepower and money to get something like that done. SharePoint and team site cleanup and organization. I don't know that that's being handled right now by a whole lot of people. People just keep putting things in, but nothing keeps getting disposed of or organized from there. Reorganization of legacy repositories, migration of legacy applications. I mean, there's all kinds of jobs where AI is going to be really important to try and get some of those things done, because manually or the way we've had to do them in the past, just too time consuming and costs way too much money. So that's my kind of presentation for today. I'll be live right after this. And I thank everybody again for listening to me. And hopefully we can answer a bunch of questions. I've asked Troy, Troy is the director of development at WesternIM, and his team actually writes the code that does this and did the integration. So Troy will be able to answer a lot of questions in a very detailed way if we need to have him do that. Thanks so much. And I'm looking forward to the rest of this series myself a lot. We're going to all learn a lot, I think, out of this in the end from each other. Thanks very much.
Great, Rick. Thanks. That was good. I hope everyone kind of, another video may not come across quite as clear, but we'll make sure we make some of the slides and stuff available if possible as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Troy. I wanted to. I realized I hadn't really talked much about what I saw at the last two conferences I've been at on the AI side, because I mean everybody's talking about AI. And AI integration, and well, they're not really talking about AI integration, they're talking about AI in general. So I wanted to kind of bring that forward while we have some time here to talk about that a little bit, is what everybody's talking about in general is how dangerous it might be for staff to use Chat GPT, which is not what we talked about through the API. This is just using the actual chat window to put things in, and how they might put in corporate information into the chat window, which would then be used by the large language model. That they talk about biases that the large language model might have for people of of color, for instance, in the US was a big topic of discussion, because the large language model may have biases built in from the training it had earlier for that kind of thing. They talk about trade secrets going into the chat window and then being used effectively in the large language model. Other things were issues surrounding hallucinations, and if you listen to the first session that Daryl did, he'll talk a bit about that. If the large language model, if ChatGPT, if you ask it a question, it comes back and gives you a 5-page document on whatever you asked it about. Say, give me a 5-page chat, give me a 5-page document on XYZ, and it'll come back and it'll give you some kind of document. And a lot of times it may look really great, but it's totally fictitious. I mean, it didn't really exist. And that's called a hallucination in a large language model AI kind of environment. And there's a lot of talk about that kind of thing as well. So anyway, it wasn't really about things to do with what we all suffer from in the records and information management industry, which is trying to get the implementations done, trying to get the users to do something that makes sense, trying to get our classification done. And the one thing I did hear most over the last couple of weeks, actually, in places I've been, is that there is not a lot of disposition going on in a lot of repositories right now. And I think a lot of that is based on the fact that people just don't have the horsepower to get the classification done properly, or they've got an older classification system that needs to be updated, or those kinds of things. And we'll explore some of that next week in the session with Ken and us as well.
Yep.
I see.
We didn't have any questions or anything here come through, but oh, there's Peggy. How do you recommend doing quality assurance if you're using AI? Although AI can generate quick info quickly, it may not be accurate. Are you aware of tools to begin developing to find errors in AI and other
Yeah, great question, Peggy. Of course, from you, that would be a great question. But my sense is we're going to have to do the same kinds of things we did with CGSB compliant scanning systems, right? I mean, we want to have a quality control situation, of course. A couple of things, though, in the AI side of things, from years of discussions over this kind of thing, one thing we know for sure is if it does it wrong, it'll do it wrong the same way every time. So at least you got some kind of chance to go back and fix something. If it's doing it wrong over and over and over again, it'll all be the same. So you can actually fix it up. But I think on the quality control, and I've thought a lot about this for sure, as same as you just brought up. How do you quality control that kind of thing? I think you take a segment of your content in let's say a repository. So let's say it's a shared drive cleanup you want to do, and you go to a department and you have a subject matter expert there, and you make sure that the information in the scope notes and everything else is complete and comfortable and ready for that kind of AI situation. And then you run the thing on a particular smaller bite-sized section of the repository, and then you take the subject matter, the SMEs, the subject matter experts, and you work through that. And I mean, we're still 10-15%, right? You got to pick a number for quality control. So you take a subsection of that and you run quality control on it, and then refine the criteria again. Add to scope notes, add new classifications into your structure, whatever you need to do to make that happen, and then run it on what it didn't get and tune it up. Troy, can you comment on that?
Yeah, so just to kind of paint a picture of how we're using the AI to kind of prevent some of what what's being brought up here, is that when people go to things like ChatGPT and ask them to generate generate me a lease agreement because I'm renting a suite. Am I confident that that response is a accurate kind of lease that I should be able to use? Now, that's kind of the worry that a lot of people have when they use these systems. To alleviate that and how we're integrating it into doing records management processes is that we give it the list of things to pick from and tell it to pick one from the list rather than just say, here's a document, you tell me again, because these large language models were trained on everything that was on the internet, based off of your understanding of everything you learned on the internet, make a determination of what this classification of this document is. That's where we run into that. Okay, how confident can we be in the response we get? So instead of doing that, we say, here's a document and here's a list and descriptions. Make a determination that matches to that list rather than just your general knowledge. And that's how we kind of limit that hallucination or inaccurate kind of information. And then further to that, because we're making it towards a list, if it can't make it that kind of determination off the information we provided, that's where we have things like processes like the classification notes where, okay, tell me what you think it would have been because you couldn't decide off the information I gave you. And then we use that classification note and feedback to help us, refine our criteria it's going against. So yeah, that's how we're kind of trying to prevent that whole hallucination or inaccuracy, is making it make decisions based off of given information, not just general information from large language model.
Right. Important nature. That's why we keep talking about that scope notes being so important. It needs to be as accurate as possible because we need to give it the right information to give it the best chance to get the thing classified properly.
Another question here. What are your thoughts on Microsoft Auto Classifier, which I believe uses machine learning? How does the tool compare to with using OpenAI? And is Microsoft leveraging or planning on using AI for classifications? There's a couple of different avenues that are happening in terms of where Microsoft is going with its co-pilots and things like that. I don't think there's a direction that has purview and co-pilot making decisions for you like we've kind of implemented. I think that's Microsoft's thing. Let's make stuff that a lot of people are going to use. So they're going to be focused on more of how do we create co-pilots for people to generate slideshows of their kids rather than records management professionals. So I don't know if we'll get that kind of stuff. That being said, there are a couple other things similar to what we're doing. The machine learning side of things that are happening in Syntax is another one that's trying to do a couple of things around auto labeling and things like that, that again is machine learning. One of the problems, like Rick was saying earlier in the past, is we generally had to train machine learning systems on a lot of data. And where the large language model has a little bit more of general understanding of language to make decisions based off of descriptions rather than examples of things, hundreds of thousands of examples of things. So that's why we're seeing quite a bit more success in what we've done with our auto classification with the large language model compared to other systems that in the past that were going down machine learning. That being said, machine learning is very good at training it on specific tasks. So if we fall short in terms of functionality we're trying to build in our software, machine learning might be a place to put it. When I initially built the rules engine, it was that kind of thing with a little bit of machine learning, a little bit more of a rules kind of algorithmic approach to doing classification or labeling. Whereas now with the large language models, we can use a little bit more natural language kind of descriptions to help that system make decisions.
Yeah, I just while you were talking about that, I was thinking back, Troy, to a time in the distant past when we not you were too young to be doing anything then, but Daryl and I were working at another organization previous to WesternIM, which is like 25-ish years ago, I guess now. And they had we were working with a tool called Foremost, which is a lot of the federal government folks used Foremost for electronic records management. And they had met an artificial intelligence vendor at a conference, and they had tried to bolt on an artificial intelligence engine to the Foremost tool to do auto classification. This is 25 years ago. You got to understand. So I can recall trying to implement auto classification into that foremost application in about what year would that have been? 1998, 9, something like that, which is a long time ago now. And it was a horrendous job because the training was took forever. Like because you had to train then you had to go train the artificial intelligence engine and what you were trying to look for. So you had to take a bunch of documents that were correct for a particular classification, each and every one of them, and put hundreds of them into a bucket and let it look at all those documents and understand what they said to give it a chance to know what should go in that particular slot. And man, it was a time-consuming effort to try and get that done. In the end, and because in those days we're using block numeric classification, or most everybody was. And at primary, man, you could get the thing to do almost 85%. But when you got it down to the secondary level, like we're talking about, dropped down to like 45. And then when you got down into tertiary, it was like non-existent, maybe 5% kind of place. So it really didn't work. And that's what I kind of like about this whole idea of large language model, because you don't have to train it. I mean, you need a decent scope notes in your classification system, but you know what? We've always needed decent classification systems and decent scope notes. So that's nothing new. It's not quite the same kind of horsepower required though to make it understand and train it on all this stuff. We get large language models, they're already built in, ready to go when we read the documents. So I think it's great, just great. I think it's going to be fabulous.
Yep. No, I don't think we have any plans to show some of the stuff you had slides for in your thing, but that's one of the things maybe we can include in the next session, is just a brief kind of showing a document going into SharePoint that's then being auto classified through all of this, or shared drives and stuff. So
yeah. Be interesting for a lot of people to see, I think. And that's kind of the thing that surprised me a lot in Detroit at the InfoCon 2023 conference, is I didn't hear a lot of vendors talking about auto classification, which is the kind of thing that I wanted to see. I wanted to see an automated process, because there's so few of us, we can't really get the job done necessarily the way we want to do it all the time, and we need some kind of way to automate that process so that we can actually get the stuff done. So
well, even just further to that too, I know a lot of our focus around today's conversation has been auto classification, but within our systems and our rules engines, we're capable of doing things beyond just here's classification, put a document to a classification. We can do things like asking the models to give us metadata. For example, here's a document, tell me what the document date is for this. So we can not only just get classifications, but we can get like metadata, we can get things like associations. So a different way to classify things, like here's a document, tell me what department it's associated with, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be records management driven. It could be, operations driven kind of processes that we want to automate using this with the metadata associations. We talked about a bit earlier on about email pointer doing auto filing, where here's the folder structure, just like I talked about earlier, here's a folder structure and here's a document, where would you put it into this folder structure? So we can make that kind of, here's some information I want you to base your decision on, and here's the information to provide feedback on, and then and use it not just for what we're talking about here with specifically classification. So just wanted to highlight that we're using it in a lot of different areas, information management in general, not just records classification.
Yeah, see, Joanne asked a question there about the have mentioned this. I don't think we did really, but have used AI to help identify documents in file shares that could be deleted prior to a SharePoint deployment. And it's a really great question, Joanne, because one of the things that always crossed my mind about this whole thing of I got a shared drive and I want to move it to a SharePoint, for instance, is we always said in the end, don't just move all the stuff out of the shared drive, the junk, right? That is there with everything else. Why won't we clean that up first, or get rid of some of the junk before we actually move it over to SharePoint, thus making it better for the people in the organization once we get it moved over. And I think to me that's a really important kind of statement is yeah, we want to do that. We want to clean things up, but it was always such a horrendous job based on the size and complexity of trying to do that, that the timing was never right. Because a lot of times I see IT departments, so they go, okay, we're moving to SharePoint, and records and information management people say, well, yeah, well, we should clean up the stuff first, right? Because that's our nature. We want to make sure it's clean going in. And then IT goes, no, we want to do that in the next 3 months. And we go, well, that's not going to happen. Like, I'm not going to clean up that shared drive in 3 months unless you give me a bucket of money and a 14 busloads of people to come and help do that. It's not going to happen. So I think that's the thing, right? It's all a timing issue. And the other thing that comes out of that question too, that always strikes me is important about using AI to do some of the things that we all want to do in our kind of business careers, is people start having multiple SharePoint sites. Like I hear people with absolutely thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of SharePoint sites and or team sites. And I mean, we all want to make sure that's clean too. Like if there's corporate information in those locations, I want to make sure that we tag it and we make sure it's going to be dealt with retention disposition wise at some point down the road. Or at least we know it's a record, corporate record. And I don't even know if it's possible in a larger organization when there's so many sites being created all the time, like team sites. As many of you know, I mean, a team site is a SharePoint site in the back end. So you get a project group and they're whipping ahead doing a bunch of projects, and they create a new team site for every project they start. And nobody ever, not never, but often they don't clean up the old project site, the old team site, before they move on to the next one. So how are we ever going to deal with all that content in all those locations if we don't have some automated methodology of actually dealing with that? I don't think it's possible. That's just me, but you can all chime in on that. And that's some of the things I want to talk about in the next session for sure, is that whole ability to do what we would call implementation of a particular thing, like rolling out SharePoint or rolling out team sites, or whatever, some kind of implementation thing that the organization is trying to do.
Yep. No, I think with that, we're getting to the top of the hour, so we can wrap up here. But I posted a couple of links in chat, just a couple of recent posts we had on some eliminating rot with this, and some shared drive reorganizations that we use some of the AI for as well. So check out the blog post there. We don't have the registration link yet for next week's. I'll get that out as soon as we can get a summary of what's going to happen. And then like I said, we're going to have 2 more sessions. The final one will be more based around a survey we'll send out after next session, and we'll get feedback and input from questions or people thought on the first 3, and we'll summarize kind of in the last one. So
Great.
yeah, look forward to the next session.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. And really looking forward to the next session. Really going to be important stuff, I think, for all of us, this whole AI side of things, to help us to actually get our jobs done that we all wanted to do from the first place.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Thanks,
everybody have a great weekend.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick.
Bye now.
Bye, everybody.